My grandfather's smile was the calmest thing in the room. "So, Ava?" he asked, his voice steady as a rock across the vast expanse of the white tablecloth. "How have you been enjoying your $3.5 million trust fund?" I blinked. My hand, which had been about to lift my wine glass, froze in midair. The question seemed to suck all the air out of the room. My what? The question split the opulent dining hall in two. We were at the Gilded Orchid, a place where crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen tears, and a single plate of food cost more than my weekly grocery budget. It was my 28th birthday. I was newly unemployed, completely broke, and being crushed under the weight of an $80,000 student loan. Across from me sat my parents, Richard and Eleanor Hastings, radiating a kind of glossy, impenetrable perfection that only a lifetime of money can sculpt. They'd been chattering about a new vacation property. Then my grandfather, Arthur Vance, had shown up, completely unannounced. He was a man of quiet, immense power, the only person in the room who felt entirely real. He'd ordered a scotch, given me a hug that felt like coming home, and then he detonated the bomb. "What trust fund?" I asked again, my voice a thin, cracking whisper. The polite dinner party laughter around us died. My mother's hand trembled, a small ripple of champagne sloshing over the rim of her glass. My father's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. He couldn't bring himself to look at me. And just like that, surrounded by strangers and food I couldn't afford, the truth began to claw its way into the light. The beautiful, flawless mask of my family shattered into a million pieces. Before we get into the wreckage, do me a favor and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more stories, and drop a comment to let me know where in the world you're tuning in from. My name is Ava Hastings. I'm 28 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I have been my family's single greatest disappointment. I was the gear that just didn't fit in the machine. In the Hastings family, love wasn't something you felt. It was something you performed. We were a cast of actors in a never-ending play, and our audience was everyone: the neighbors, the members of the golf club, any passing stranger who might catch a glimpse of our perfectly curated Christmas card. Money was our script. Silence was our stage direction. If you missed a line or stepped out of place, my parents wouldn't raise their voices. They would simply cut you out of the scene. You'd become invisible, frozen out by a wall of punishing silence, until you figured out which unspoken rule you'd broken and offered a groveling apology. My parents, Richard and Eleanor, resided in a sprawling monument of glass and steel in Bellevue. It had a swimming pool that was always a perfect, sterile shade of turquoise, and a 4-car garage containing 2 matching Audis, one in glacier white and the other in metallic black. They were members of exclusive social clubs where the dress code was white and the gin was always top shelf. The house itself was immaculate, not a speck of dust. No disorganized stacks of mail on the counter. It was less a home and more a showroom from a high-end architecture magazine. It was also cold. I don't mean the thermostat. I mean the feeling that permeated the air. It was a house designed to be looked at, not lived in. I, on the other hand, lived in a cramped 400-square-foot studio in Seattle. My apartment featured a radiator that clanged like a blacksmith all night, and a leaky faucet in the bathroom that dripped with maddening persistence. I knew my neighbors' dinner plans and their arguments through the paper-thin walls. I was a renter, and I was barely clinging on. The contrast between our lives was a cruel joke. They inhabited a palace of silence and image, while I was stuck in the noise and grime of the real world. The realest thing in my life was my debt. I remembered my college graduation like it was yesterday. I'd worked my tail off, earning a good design degree from a prestigious art school. I also had $80,000 in student loans to show for it. My parents had covered my first 2 years, but then one day, my father informed me they were tapering off their support. It was time, he'd declared, for me to assume financial responsibility. At my graduation dinner, they presented me with a small, beautifully wrapped box. For a foolish moment, I thought it might be a check, a little help with that first terrifying loan payment. I opened it. Inside was a book, a heavy hardcover copy of The Resilient Investor, A Guide to Financial Freedom. I just sat there staring at it. My mother produced that tight camera-ready smile of hers. "We thought this would be more valuable than money in the long run, darling," she'd said. "It's about fostering independence." My father nodded sagely, taking a slow sip of his Cabernet. "Adversity builds character, Ava. We provided the education. The rest is up to you." A hot flush of shame crawled up my neck. I glanced around the restaurant at other families. Other graduates were laughing, pocketing envelopes from their parents, excitedly discussing plans for their first real apartments. I was holding a book on how to budget. I wanted to disappear. Instead, I just said, "Thank you, it's very thoughtful." That was their method. They never offered a hand, but they were always ready with a judgment. They'd call and ask what projects I was working on. I'd tell them about a freelance gig, a website I was designing for a local business. My father would hum into the phone. "Freelance? Is that really stable, Ava? You should be looking for a corporate position, benefits, a 401k. "The market is really competitive, Dad," I'd say. "It's only competitive if you're not ambitious enough," he'd reply, the unspoken accusation hanging in the air. They never once asked if I was okay. They never asked if I was happy. They only ever asked if I was successful. And in their dictionary, successful was just a synonym for rich. Since I wasn't rich, I was a topic to be avoided. I was their broke, artistic daughter, the blemish on the family portrait. Now, at 28, I was still freelancing. I was working around the clock, chasing down late payments, juggling my power bill against my grocery budget. I pretended I was thriving. I curated my Instagram feed just like they curated their lives, posting carefully framed photos of my design work, my one healthy houseplant, the fancy latte I'd treat myself to when I had an extra $5. I was performing just like them. I was playing the part of the chic, successful Seattle designer. In reality, I was petrified. I was one canceled contract away from complete collapse. The only person who knew the whole truth was my roommate, Chloe Reed. Chloe was my rock, my best friend. She was a barista by day and a poet by night, with a heart of gold and an intuition as sharp as a blade. She saw straight through my performance, and she saw straight through my family. We shared our tiny apartment and split every bill down to the penny. Chloe was the one who would find me at 2 a.m., staring at my laptop with my face pale from stress. "They got in your head again, didn't they?" she'd ask gently. I'd just nod. "Just a call. Mom was asking why I haven't invested in a new professional wardrobe." My wardrobe consisted of clothes I'd had since college. Chloe would put the kettle on. "Ava," she told me one night, sitting across our wobbly little kitchen table, "they don't actually see you. They see a reflection of themselves. And if that reflection has a single flaw, they just turn away. It's not about you. It's about them." "I know," I'd whisper, "but it still hurts." "Of course it hurts," she'd say, her voice fierce. "They're your parents. They're supposed to be proud of you, just for making it in this city. They're supposed to help." I remember one Christmas 2 years prior. I'd driven to their house in Bellevue for their massive annual party. My mother had hired caterers and a mixologist. Beneath a gigantic, professionally decorated Christmas tree, there were mountains of expensive gifts. They gave my father a new set of custom golf clubs that cost more than my car. He gave my mother a diamond tennis bracelet. They gave me a ticket, a single, glossy ticket to a weekend seminar called Activate Your Inner CEO. I held the ticket in my hand. It was worth $1,000. I knew because I'd seen the relentless ads for it online. $1,000 they could have given me to help with rent, to put a dent in my loans. Instead, they gave me another lecture disguised as a gift. Another thinly veiled message that I wasn't measuring up. "It's supposed to be life-changing, Ava," my father said, patting my shoulder. "Maybe this will be the thing that finally gets you on track." I excused myself, went to the guest bathroom and cried. I cried for 10 minutes, silent sobs into a plush hand towel so none of the guests would hear. Then I reapplied my mascara, went back out, and smiled. I performed. It was the only way to survive being a Hastings. I smiled and thanked them for the incredibly thoughtful gift. I never went to the seminar. I sold the ticket on Craigslist for $500 and used the money to pay my car insurance for the year. That was my life, a constant grinding struggle, all lived in the long shadow of parents who owned Audis and pristine swimming pools, but who gave me a budgeting book when I was drowning in debt. They told me they were teaching me to build character. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that my character was being built on a foundation of lies. The end of my old life began 1 week before my 28th birthday. It was a Tuesday. The Seattle sky was a familiar blanket of gray pressing down on the city. I was summoned to a meeting with my main client, a small tech startup that I did long-term contract design for. They were my bread and butter, my one stable freelance gig. My boss, a man named David, looked haggard. He couldn't meet my gaze, staring instead at the polished surface of the conference table. "Ava," he began, clearing his throat, "you're wonderful. Your work is top-notch. The whole team loves having you." My stomach twisted into a cold knot. I knew what came after the compliments. "But," I prompted softly, "but we just lost our Series B funding. We have to make cuts, severe cuts. As of Friday, we're dissolving the entire design department. Your contract is being terminated." I just nodded. A deep chill spread through my body. I couldn't feel my fingers. "I understand," I said, my voice sounding distant and strange, like it was coming from someone else. "We can pay you for the next 2 weeks," he said, sliding a thin envelope across the table toward me. I'm truly sorry, Ava." I took the envelope. "Thank you, David." I walked out of the conference room. I gathered my notebooks and my favorite drawing pens from my desk and put them in my tote bag. I didn't say goodbye to anyone. I just walked out the door and into the gray afternoon. I felt like I was suffocating. That job was nearly 70% of my monthly income. I did the frantic math in my head as I walked down the street. Rent, utilities, my student loan payment, my car payment. I didn't have enough. I was $400 short for the next month. And after that, I had nothing. I walked the entire way home. My feet were throbbing by the time I climbed the stairs to my apartment. Chloe was in the kitchen, grinding coffee beans for her evening writing session. She took one look at my face and put the grinder down. "What's wrong?" she asked. "You have your ghost face on." I let my bag drop to the floor. The envelope slipped out. "I lost my job," I whispered. "The dam broke." The tears just started streaming down my face. I was so exhausted, so profoundly scared. Chloe was by my side in an instant, pulling me into a hug. "Oh, Ava, I'm so sorry. It's okay. We'll figure something out. How? I sobbed into her shoulder. I have no money. I have zero savings. I'm going to be evicted. She pushed me back, holding me by the shoulders. No, you are not. We'll figure it out. And you are going to call your parents. I pulled away, wiping at my face with the back of my hand. I let out a bitter laugh. Right. And what are they going to do? Send me a link to a LinkedIn article about networking? Ava, this is different, she said, her voice firm. This isn't about building character. This is a real emergency. You lost your job. You're their daughter. They have to help you. They have 2 Audis, for crying out loud. They can cover your rent for a month. Her logic was so clean, so simple. It made perfect sense, but she didn't know them, not really. Chloe, you don't get it, I said. Asking them for money, it's the worst thing I can possibly do. It's handing them a signed confession that I'm a failure. They will hold it over my head forever. Who cares? She shot back. Swallow your pride. You need help. Call them. She was right. I had no other options. I was at the end of my rope. My hands trembled as I went to my room, sat on the edge of my bed, and picked up my phone. I rehearsed what I would say. Mom, I have a serious problem. I lost my job and I can't make rent. Simple, direct. I dialed her number. It rang 3 times before she picked up. Ava, hello, darling. Her voice was light and airy, the sound of someone smiling. She was probably pruning the roses in her perfectly manicured garden. Hi, Mom. My voice was barely a whisper. Is this an okay time? For a minute, I'm just about to leave for my book club. What's on your mind? I took a shaky breath. Mom, I have some really bad news. I lost my job today. The company downsized and I'm in a really bad position. I can't pay my rent next month. There was a pause. Not a warm, empathetic pause. It was a cold, clinical pause. I could almost hear the calculations happening in her head. I heard her sigh, a sound of pure annoyance. Oh, Ava, that's a real shame, she said, all the sparkle gone from her voice. You know, your father and I were always worried about that startup. It never seemed very stable. You really should have been looking for something corporate all along. Mom, I know, but... Well, she cut me off. You'll just have to get back on the horse. Polish up that resume. You're a smart girl. You'll find something. My eyes welled up with fresh tears. She wasn't hearing the urgency. Mom, I will, I said, my voice wavering. But I mean right now. I can't pay my rent now. I'm short. I need help. Another pause. This one was even colder, laced with judgment. Ava, you are 28 years old. Your father and I cannot continue to bail you out. Bail me out? When have you ever bailed me out? We paid for 2 years of your college, she snapped. We've done our part. This is precisely what an emergency fund is for. You have been saving, haven't you? I was silent. Saving? What money was I supposed to be saving? I've been paying my student loans, I said quietly. Well, that's a choice you made, isn't it? She said. Look, darling, I really have to run, but don't you worry. You'll figure it out. You always do. Wait, Mom, I said, my voice thick with desperation. That's not all. My birthday is on Friday. I don't think I can come to the dinner. That finally got her full attention. Her voice turned sharp as glass. What do you mean you can't come? I've already made the reservations at the Gilded Orchid. Your father is very much looking forward to it. We're celebrating you. Mom, I just told you I lost my job. I have less than $400 to my name. I can't go to a place that costs $300 a plate. I can't even afford the Uber to get there. My mother actually laughed. A short, tinkling sound that made my stomach churn. Oh, don't be so dramatic, Ava. We're paying, of course. It's your birthday. We're not monsters. Aren't you? I thought. Just pull yourself together, she continued, her voice all business now. Put on a nice dress and a brave face. We want to have a lovely evening. Don't bring all this negativity to the table. All right, it's your birthday. Try to be happy. I was speechless. Great, I'll see you Friday at 7 and don't be late. Bye, darling. The line clicked dead. She was gone. I sat on my bed, staring at the blank wall. I had just told my mother I was on the verge of being homeless, and she had told me not to be dramatic and to try to be happy. Chloe was standing in the doorway. She'd heard everything. Her face was ashen. I have no words, Ava, she whispered. A strange, cold calm settled over me. The panic had receded, replaced by something hard and dead. It's okay, I said, my voice flat. She's right. I'll figure it out. I looked at the calendar on my wall. Friday, my 28th birthday. I circled the date with a red marker. It didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a final sentence. The Gilded Orchid was a restaurant engineered to make you feel inadequate. The ceiling soared 30 feet high, with massive crystal chandeliers that looked like frozen explosions. The floors were polished black marble that amplified the clicks of the waitstaff's shoes, all of whom looked like off-duty models. The air was thick with the scent of money and expensive perfume. I walked in wearing my best dress, a simple black sheath I'd owned for 3 years. I had done my hair and makeup meticulously. I was a Hastings after all. I knew how to perform. Tonight, I was playing the part of the daughter who is perfectly fine. My parents were already at their table, a prime spot right in the center of the room. My father, Richard, was in a crisp, dark suit, sharing a loud, theatrical laugh with the maitre d'. My mother, Eleanor, looked like she was carved from porcelain. She wore a new silk blouse and the diamond bracelet my father had given her for Christmas. She spotted me, and her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Ava, you made it. Happy birthday, sweetheart. She kissed the air beside my cheek. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. Ava, good, you're on time, my father said, not looking up from the leather-bound wine list. I sat down. The chair was plush velvet. A waiter materialized instantly and filled my water glass. The menu was written in elegant French script, with no prices listed. I knew that was the universal sign for, you can't afford it. I was just telling your mother, my father announced to the table. We're moving forward on the Whistler project, a new ski chalet. It's going to be magnificent. Oh, I thought you were looking in Aspen, I said, trying to participate. No, darling, Whistler now, my mother corrected smoothly. Your father found a wonderful plot of land. They spoke about timber samples and shipping logistics. They discussed a new abstract sculpture my mother was commissioning for the garden. They talked at me, not with me. I just nodded and smiled, playing my part. I was the audience for their one-act play titled, We Are Very Rich and Successful. Finally, my father deigned to turn his attention to me. So what about you, Ava? Going to start hitting the pavement, right? Looking for a new position? Yes, Dad. I'm updating my portfolio tonight. Good, he said, nodding absently as his eyes scanned the room, probably looking for someone more important to acknowledge. You'll bounce back. You always do. Character, remember? He said it with a self-satisfied smile, as if he'd personally invented the concept. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand on the table and shout, I can't pay my rent. I am terrified. Don't you see me at all? But I didn't. I just smiled. Yes, Dad. Character. The waiter returned to take our order. I chose the cheapest sounding entree, a chicken dish. My mother ordered the lobster. My father, the $150 Wagyu steak. Just as our appetizers were being placed on the table, the maitre d' scurried to the front door. He opened it with a look of nervous deference, and in walked my grandfather, Arthur Vance. My heart did a little flip. I hadn't seen him in nearly 6 months. My grandfather was the complete antithesis of my parents. He was self-made, having built an investment empire from absolutely nothing. He was quiet, composed, and possessed the sharpest, kindest eyes I'd ever known. He was the only person in my entire family who had ever made me feel truly seen. I knew my parents were terrified of him. He wasn't in a flashy suit. He wore a simple, perfectly tailored tweed blazer and dark trousers. He commanded the room simply by existing in it. My mother's smile froze on her face. "Father," she said, her voice suddenly high and brittle. What a surprise. We didn't know you were in town." My grandfather's eyes swept over the table, gliding past my parents as if they were part of the decor. His gaze landed on me, and his entire face broke into a genuine, warm smile. "Ava," he said. He walked directly to me, bypassing my mother's offered cheek. He pulled me up from my chair and enveloped me in a real hug, a strong, warm embrace that smelled of cedar and good whiskey. "Happy birthday, my girl," he whispered into my ear. "Grandpa," I whispered back, clinging to him for a second too long. "What are you doing here?" "I wouldn't miss your birthday," he said. He commandeered a chair from a nearby table, and with a single commanding nod, a waiter scrambled to set a place for him. He sat down beside me. "Arthur, we would have invited you," my father stammered. "Clearly," my grandfather said. His voice was pleasant, but his eyes were like chips of ice as he looked at my parents. He ordered a scotch, neat. He took a slow, deliberate sip. The tension at the table was so thick you could have cut it with a steak knife. My parents were attempting to smile, but they looked like they were chewing on ground glass. My grandfather turned back to me, his expression warm once more. "I apologize for my tardiness. I was in a meeting with my lawyers, finalizing some estate matters." "Oh," I said, "that sounds terribly boring." He chuckled. "It is, but it's necessary. It's mostly about trusts, keeping all of them in order. It's amazing how much they can grow over 28 years. He took another sip of his scotch. He smiled at me, a kind, simple smile, and then he asked the question. "So, Ava," he said, his voice perfectly calm, "how have you been enjoying your $3.5 million trust fund?" Time stopped. The ambient clinking of silverware and hushed conversations of the restaurant faded into a dull roar. I just stared at him, certain I had misheard. $3.5 million? I tried to laugh, but it came out as a strangled squeak. He smiled, but his eyes were laser-focused on me. Only me. "Give or take, that's what Julian, my attorney, estimates the current value to be. It's been compounding for a very long time." I blinked. My hand was still frozen on my wine glass. I have no idea what you're talking about," I said. "What trust fund?" My grandfather's smile slowly dissolved. He turned his head just slightly to look at my parents. I followed his gaze. My mother's face was the color of chalk. Her perfectly painted red lipstick smile had collapsed. Her hand was shaking so violently that her champagne flute was rattling against the table. My father's face was completely drained of color. He looked nauseous. He was staring down at his plate as if it held the secrets to the universe. He couldn't look at me. He couldn't look at my grandfather. He couldn't look at anyone. The truth was a physical presence in the room now, an ugly, uninvited guest. My grandfather's voice didn't rise. It didn't get angry. It just became sharp and as cold as a shard of broken glass. Richard, he said. Eleanor? He waited. What trust fund, Grandpa? I asked again, my voice cracking. I looked directly at my parents. Mom, Dad, what is he talking about? My mother flinched as if I'd struck her. My father squeezed his eyes shut. My grandfather looked back at me. His face was filled with a profound sadness. The trust I established for you on the day you were born, Ava, he said, his voice quiet but crystal clear. The one I funded with an initial $1 million deposit, the one your parents, as your legal trustees, were required to turn over to you when you turned 25. He paused, letting the words hang in the air. 3 years ago. The atmosphere in the main dining room had become toxic. Patrons at other tables were beginning to stare. My mother looked like she was about to faint. My father looked like he was going to be sick. The maitre d' glided over, his face a mask of professional panic. Sir, perhaps you would be more comfortable in one of our private dining rooms? My grandfather gave a single curt nod. Yes, thank you. We walked. I felt completely numb. My legs were moving, but I couldn't feel the floor beneath me. I just followed my grandfather's steady presence. Behind me, I could hear my mother whispering furiously to my father. How did he find out? How? You told me. Shut up, Eleanor, my father hissed back. The private room was all dark wood and heavy silence. It contained one long, polished mahogany table. 2 people were already there, waiting. They stood as my grandfather entered. One was a man in his late 40s, dressed in a sharp, expensive suit with the predatory eyes of a shark. The other was a younger woman in an impeccable black dress holding an iPad. She looked calm, efficient, and as if she missed nothing. Ava, my grandfather said gently, this is my attorney, Julian Croft, and this is my associate, Isabel Chen. Miss Hastings, Julian Croft said. He didn't smile. He wasn't there to be friendly. He pulled out a chair for me. I sat. My parents hovered awkwardly by the door. Sit down, Richard, Eleanor, my grandfather said. It was not a request. They sat at the far end of the long table, looking small and defeated. Julian Croft placed a slim, leather-bound folder in front of me and opened it. Miss Hastings, he said, his voice crisp and professional. On the day you were born, your grandfather, Mr. Arthur Vance, created an irrevocable trust in your name. He made an initial deposit of $1 million. I stared at the document. It was a bank statement. It had my name on it, Ava Hastings Trust. With conservative market growth and compounded interest over 28 years, Julian continued, that trust should now hold, by our estimates, approximately $3.5 million. I couldn't breathe. My mind was scrambling to make sense of the numbers. $3.5 million, $80,000 in student loans, less than $400 in my checking account. The equation was broken. I don't understand, I whispered. Neither do we, Julian said, tapping the folder. We pulled the official bank statements this afternoon. As of today, the current balance in the trust is $200,000. I looked up from the paper. 200,000? My grandfather, who had been standing by the window, finally sat down at the head of the table. He looked at my father. His voice was deathly calm. Where did it go, Richard? My father began to sweat profusely. Arthur, it's complicated. You don't understand the market. The 2008 crash, it was a disaster. We had to move money around to protect it. Protect it? My grandfather repeated, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. My mother finally found her voice. It was high-pitched and trembling. We were safeguarding it. For her, for Ava's future. We were just waiting for the right time to tell her, when she was more mature. I felt something dark and hot rise in my throat, tasting like acid. I laughed. It was a horrible, ugly, broken sound. All of them looked at me. "Mature," I said, my voice shaking with a rage I didn't know I possessed. "You were safeguarding it?" I looked at my mother. "I called you on Tuesday. I was crying. I told you I lost my job. I told you I couldn't pay my rent. And you told me not to be dramatic. You told me to try to be happy." I turned to my father. "You gave me a book on personal finance for my graduation." A book, while I was sitting on $80,000 of debt. My debt. You told me adversity builds character. Was this my character-building exercise, was it? They just stared at me, their faces a collage of guilt and ugliness. "Where did it go?" My grandfather asked again, his voice like the crack of a whip. It was investments," my father said, his voice rising in panic. "Bad investments, maybe. The real estate market in Palm Springs." "Let's be specific," Julian Croft said, cutting him off. He nodded to Isabel. Isabel, the associate, stepped forward and tapped her iPad. Her voice was flat, robotic, as she read from a list of withdrawals from the Ava Hastings Trust, all dated after my 25th birthday, the day they were legally obligated to release the funds to me. "March 10th, 3 years ago," Isabel read. "Withdrawal, $450,000. Purpose noted, payoff of existing mortgage, Bellevue property." I stared at my parents, their house, the glass and steel palace I thought they had owned outright for decades. They paid off their mortgage with my money. "April 2nd, Isabel continued. Withdrawal, $280,000. Purpose noted, vehicle purchase, one Audi Q8, one Audi e-tron GT. The matching Audis, the pristine set, my money. June 1st through September 10th, a series of withdrawals totaling $320,000. Purpose noted, home renovation, kitchen and outdoor living space. The Whistler project my dad had just been bragging about? No, this was the Bellevue house, the new chef's kitchen, the perfect turquoise pool. All of it was mine. My mother was openly sobbing now, her face buried in her hands. We were going to pay it back. We just needed a short-term loan. "A loan?" Julian Croft said without looking up from his papers. "Was there a loan agreement filed, Mrs. Hastings? Did Ava sign any such agreement?" Isabel wasn't finished. October 1st, withdrawal $500,000. Purpose noted, initial investment, Eleanor Hastings Interiors. My mother's vanity business, her interior design company that I knew for a fact had never landed a single paying client. She had used $500,000 of my money to build a fancy website and print embossed business cards. I felt sick. I thought I was going to be sick right there on the polished mahogany table. "And the final one," Isabel said, her voice dropping slightly. "January 5th of this year. Withdrawal, $1.8 million. Purpose noted, down payment, Malibu property." The room was utterly silent save for the sound of my mother's quiet, gasping sobs. They had taken it all. They had plundered my future to pay for their mortgage, their cars, their renovations, their hobbies, and a beach house. My grandfather's hand, which was resting on the table, slowly curled into a tight fist. His knuckles turned white. He looked at his son. "You stole from your own daughter," he said, his voice so quiet it was terrifying. "You let her struggle. You let her beg you for help. And you told her it was good for her character. All while you were driving her cars, swimming in her pool, and living in her house." "We're family, Arthur," my mother wailed, her makeup streaking down her ruined face. It's all family money. We did it for us, for the family." "Family doesn't steal from each other, Eleanor," my grandfather replied. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at my father. "Richard, give them to me." My father looked utterly bewildered. "Give you what?" "The keys," my grandfather said. "The keys to your house and your cars. Give them to me, now." My father's hand trembled as he reached into his suit pocket. He pulled out his keyring. The silver Audi key fob was attached. He placed it on the table. My grandfather looked at my mother. "Yours too, Eleanor." Sobbing, she fumbled in her expensive handbag and put her own keys on the table. My grandfather picked up both sets. The jingle of the keys was deafening in the silent room. He slid them across the polished table. They spun slowly on the dark wood until they came to a stop directly in front of me. I just stared at them. The keys to the house where I was never truly welcome. The keys to the cars bought with my stolen life. "They're yours, Ava," my grandfather said, his voice soft now and filled with a terrible sadness. 3 years overdue. I don't remember leaving the restaurant. I don't remember the expression on the maitre d's face or the curious stares from the other diners. I just remember the cold. The moment I stepped outside, the damp Seattle air wrapped around me like a shroud. It was thick and wet, blurring the streetlights into hazy halos. I left my grandfather and his team inside. I heard Arthur's low voice. "Julian, handle them. Isabel, get my car." I didn't look back at my parents. I couldn't bear to. I just started walking. I didn't take a cab. I didn't have the money for one. The irony was so sharp, it made me want to laugh. I had just learned I was a millionaire, and I still couldn't afford a $10 ride home. I began the 3-mile walk back to my tiny studio. In my hand, I clutched the 2 sets of keys. They were heavy and cold. They jingled softly as I walked, a tiny metallic reminder. They were proof that my entire life, every memory I held dear, was a lie. As I walked, the fog swirling around my feet, my mind started to replay my life, but this time with the truth as a filter. I remembered my graduation, my $80,000 student loan debt, my father's lecture. "Adversity builds character, Ava." He had said that to me. He had looked me right in the eye and said it. He had let me sign those loan documents. He had allowed me to take on a debt that would hang over me for years. And all the while, my money, my $3.5 million, was sitting in an account that he was actively pillaging. He didn't let me struggle to build my character. He let me struggle so I would be too preoccupied to ever ask questions. He let me struggle so he could steal from me without interruption. I gripped the keys tighter, my knuckles aching. I kept walking. I passed a bus stop and a memory hit me so hard I stumbled. My old beater car had broken down 3 years ago. The repair was going to be $900. I didn't have it. I had called my dad, my stomach churning with shame. I'd said, "Dad, I'm in a real bind. My car died. I need it for my freelance work. Can you possibly lend me the money? I'll pay you back every cent." I remembered his long, weary sigh, the sound of his profound disappointment. "Ava," he had said, "when are you going to learn to stand on your own 2 feet? A car is a major responsibility. This is exactly why you need a real job, not this freelance fantasy. Take the bus. It will be a good lesson for you." I had cried after that call, feeling small and stupid and utterly alone. I ended up selling my grandmother's locket, my other grandmother's, to pay the mechanic. He had told me to take the bus, and then, a few months later, according to Isabel's list, he had walked into an Audi dealership and bought 2 brand new luxury cars with my money. A wave of nausea rolled over me, so powerful I had to stop. I leaned against a cold, damp brick wall. I didn't throw up, but I wanted to. I just dry heaved into a planter box, disgusted. I wasn't just angry. I was revolted. They were revolting. I thought of my mother, her tinkling laugh on the phone just days ago. "Don't be so dramatic, Ava. We're not monsters." She had said that to me. She said it while sitting in a house for which I had paid the mortgage. She was wearing clothes bought with my money. She was planning her next vacation, funded by my future. She wasn't just a monster. She was a smiling one, the worst kind. I pushed myself off the wall and kept walking. My feet were numb inside my shoes. I thought about all the little things. Every Christmas when they gave me a self-help book or a cheap sweater while they exchanged diamonds and expensive watches. Every single time I visited their perfect, cold house and felt like a guest, like a poor relation they had to tolerate. I was a poor relation. They had deliberately made me one. They didn't just steal my money, they stole my 20s. They stole my chance to start my own business, to buy a small condo, to travel, to be young and not constantly terrified of my next rent payment. They stole my security. They stole my confidence. They stole my relationship with them, a relationship I had tried so desperately to fix. I had spent my entire adult life believing I was the problem, that I wasn't good enough, or smart enough, or ambitious enough. It was all a lie, a long, cruel, meticulously crafted lie. When I finally reached my apartment building, it was well past midnight. The lobby smelled of old carpet and disinfectant. I climbed the 4 flights of stairs, my legs aching with a deep weariness. I stood in front of my door, my cheap particle board door with its peeling paint. I pulled my own key out of my pocket. It looked so small and insignificant next to the heavy, expensive keys from my parents. I opened the door. Chloe was asleep on the couch, the TV on with the volume low. She had waited up for me. She must have heard me come in because her eyes snapped open. She sat up, her hair a mess. "Ava, oh my God, you're so late. Are you okay? How was—" She stopped. She was staring at my face. I must have looked like a ghost. I didn't say anything. I just walked to the little kitchen table. I opened my hand and dropped the 2 sets of keys onto it. They hit the cheap wood with a loud, heavy clack. Chloe stared at the keys. She saw the silver Audi fobs. What is that?" she whispered. "Ava, what happened?" I sat down. I felt hollowed out. I told her everything. From the moment my grandfather walked into the restaurant. I told her about his question. What trust fund? I told her about the private room, about Julian and Isabel. I told her the numbers, 3.5 million, 200,000 left. I told her the list, the mortgage, the cars, the renovation, the $1.8 million down payment on a beach house in Malibu. Chloe just sat there, her expression shifting from confusion to shock to white-hot rage. Her eyes filled with tears, but they were angry tears. When I finally finished, she was silent for a long time. She just stared at the keys on the table. "They stole your future," she said finally. Her voice was a whisper, but it was harder than steel. "Ava, they stole your entire life." I looked at the keys. I felt something shift deep inside me. The numbness was beginning to fade. The shock was burning off, and underneath it all, it wasn't just sadness. It was something else, something cold and hard and clear. "Not just my future, Chloe," I said. My voice was low and steady. It didn't even sound like me. "They stole my faith. They stole the very idea of them." Chloe finally looked up at me. "Ava, what are you going to do? Are you okay? You should be, I don't know, screaming, crying." I shook my head. "I can't. I don't feel sad. I feel empty, and I feel clear." I hadn't cried. I wouldn't. Tears were for sadness. This was something else entirely. This was a reckoning. Chloe nodded slowly. She understood. She got up and made me a cup of tea, placing it in my hands. "Okay," she said. "Okay, what's next?" I drank the tea. It was hot, and it was the first real thing I had felt in hours. I looked at the keys. Then I looked at my laptop, closed on the table. My parents had taught me to build character. They had taught me to be responsible. I stood up. I walked to the table and picked up my laptop. I sat back down and opened it. "I'm going to do what they taught me," I said. Chloe looked confused. "What, budget?" I shook my head as I opened a web browser. "No," I said, "I'm going to plan." I didn't search for jobs. I didn't look at my bank account. I typed "breach of fiduciary duty" into the search bar. I started to read. I started to learn. They had made me a victim, but in doing so, they had also made me something else. They had made me a witness. And the night was just getting started. The next 3 days were a cocoon of silence. I stayed inside my apartment. I didn't answer my phone, which was ringing off the hook with calls from numbers I didn't recognize. Lawyers, no doubt, hired by my parents. I just let it ring until it went to voicemail. Chloe acted as my gatekeeper. She went to work, came home with groceries, and would say, "The world is still out there. We're okay." I wasn't sure if I'd ever be okay again. I was something new now, a person who had been hollowed out and scraped clean. I slept, but it wasn't restful. I ate, but I couldn't taste the food. I was simply waiting. On the third day, a Monday, an email appeared in my inbox. It wasn't from my grandfather. It was from Isabel Chen, his associate. The email was brief and to the point. "Ava, Mr. Vance requests your presence at his office. 10 a.m. tomorrow. A car will be waiting for you at 9. It wasn't an invitation. It was a summons. That night, I ironed my only good blouse. I laid out my one pair of black trousers. I wasn't dressing to perform. I wasn't trying to be the dutiful daughter. I was dressing for battle. The car, a black silent sedan, was there at 9 a.m. sharp. The driver didn't speak, just held the door for me. We drove downtown into the heart of the financial district. We pulled up to a skyscraper of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the clouds. Isabel was waiting for me in the lobby. "Miss Hastings," she said, her voice professional but not unkind. "They're waiting for you upstairs." We rode the elevator up, so fast my ears popped. We went to the very top floor, the 50th. The doors opened onto a space that was all glass, steel, and hushed power. The floors were gray slate. The only color came from the panoramic view of the city skyline. Isabel led me down a long hall to a massive boardroom. The table was a single, immense piece of dark wood that could have seated 30. And at the far end, looking small against the giant window, were my parents. They looked awful. My father's expensive suit was wrinkled. He hadn't shaved. His eyes were bloodshot and baggy. My mother was a complete wreck. Her perfectly coiffed blonde hair was flat and lifeless. She wore no makeup, and her face was puffy and swollen from days of crying. These were not the polished, perfect Hastings from the restaurant. They were just two old, frightened people. My grandfather, Arthur, sat at the head of the table. He looked serene and powerful in a perfect suit. He looked like a king in his castle. Julian Croft, the lawyer, stood by the window, shuffling through a stack of papers. I walked in. My heels clicked loudly on the slate floor. The sound echoed in the silence. My mother saw me and shot to her feet. "Ava! Oh, Ava, thank God!" She started to move toward me. "Sit down, Eleanor," my grandfather said, his voice quiet but absolute. She froze. She looked from him to me, then sank back into her chair. I didn't sit with them. I took a seat across the long table next to my grandfather. My father placed his hands on the table, trying to project an image of strength, but they were trembling. "Ava," he said, his voice weak and hoarse, "we just want to make this right. We want to apologize." I looked at him. I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, just a vast, cold emptiness. "You want to make it right?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "Or do you want to make it right now that you've been caught?" My father flinched as if I'd slapped him. "Ava, that's not fair," my mother whispered. "It was complicated. We always meant to." "You always meant to what?" I cut her off. "To tell me? When? When you were relaxing on the beach in Malibu, in a house you bought with my money? Or maybe when I was getting an eviction notice for my apartment? When exactly was the right time going to be?" They had no answer. They just sat in their guilty silence. Julian Croft stepped forward. He placed a new folder in front of me. "Miss Hastings," he said, "we have been very busy over the last 72 hours. He glanced at my parents with unconcealed disdain. "We have initiated asset seizure. The $200,000 remaining in the trust is, of course, secure. We have also frozen all of your primary financial accounts. The deeds to the Bellevue house and the Malibu property have been flagged. The down payment for the Malibu home was fraudulent. It will be recovered. The Audis are already in the possession of a recovery firm. As of this morning, we have successfully recovered approximately $2 million of the stolen funds." My father's head dropped. He just stared at the table. My mother let out a strangled sob. And then she did the one thing she knew how to do. She attacked. "You!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "How could you do this to us? We did this for you." I just looked at her, my expression unreadable. "For me?" "Yes, for you," she cried, her voice rising hysterically. She was sobbing, but it was a performance. I knew her fake crying. This was for an audience of one. "We had to maintain the family's image, for your sake, so you could have connections, so you could be proud of who you were. We were protecting the family. We were protecting you." Her words hung in the air. "For me. Proud." I thought of her laughing at my predicament on the phone. I thought of the budgeting book. I thought of all the nights I had eaten instant noodles and cried over my student loan statements. My voice, when I finally spoke, was so quiet that everyone had to lean in to hear. "Parents protect," I said, looking directly into her eyes. "They don't plunder." She recoiled. "You didn't do this for me," I said, my voice gaining strength. "You did this for a kitchen. You did this for a car. You did this because you are so empty inside that you had to fill your house with my future. You let me drown. You let me beg you for help, and you did nothing. You didn't do it for the family. You did it for yourselves." The room was dead silent. My grandfather, who hadn't said a word, finally turned. He didn't look at his son. He looked at me. His face was sad, but his eyes were proud. "The decision is yours, Ava," he said, his voice low. My parents' heads snapped up. They stared at him, then at me. Raw animal fear was in their eyes. "What? What decision?" my father stammered. "Julian has prepared 2 options, my grandfather said, steepling his fingers. "Option 1, you sign over every remaining asset. The houses, the accounts, the retirement funds, everything. You will be left with a small, state-mandated pension. You will live, but you will have nothing else. You will sign a full confession, and we will handle this quietly. You will not be criminally charged." He paused. "Option 2, we press charges. Julian will contact the district attorney who is awaiting his call. You will be charged with financial fraud, grand larceny, and breach of fiduciary duty. You will very likely go to prison." He looked at me. "The choice is yours, Ava. Press charges or let them walk away." My mother began to hyperventilate. "Ava, no, please, please, honey. I'm your mother. You can't send us to prison. We're family." She was begging. The great Eleanor Hastings, who cared so much about appearances, was begging me. My father just sat there, staring at me, his face pale and slick with sweat. This was it. This was my moment, the one real choice I had ever been given in my life. I could be nice. I could be the good daughter one last time. I could let them go and just take the money. But then I thought about the word family. I thought about what it was supposed to mean. And I thought about what they had turned it into, a weapon, an excuse, a shield for their own greed. I looked at my mother. I looked at my father. "You left me with nothing," I said, my voice clear and cold. "When I had nothing, you left me. You told me to try to be happy." I stood up. "So they can live with the same. File the charges." My grandfather did not hesitate. He didn't even blink. The moment the words "file the charges" left my mouth, he gave a single decisive nod. He looked at Julian Croft. "Julian," he said, "give the order." Julian Croft picked up his cell phone. He pressed a single button on his screen. "File it," he said into the phone, and then hung up. The finality of it was brutal. It was done. My mother understood what had just happened. The performance was over. The begging was over. She let out a wail that was not human. It was an animal sound, the sound of something being trapped and cornered. "No!" she shrieked. "No, you can't, Ava. You can't do this. I am your mother." She lunged across the table, trying to grab me, her hands like claws. Her face was twisted and ugly. I didn't even flinch. I just took a step back. Isabel and Julian were there in an instant, not touching her, but forming a barrier. "Mrs. Hastings," Julian said, his voice like ice. "Stop." "You did this!" She screamed at me, her face red and contorted. All the beauty, all the polish had been stripped away. This was the real person underneath. "You ungrateful, you—" My father just sat there. He was a ghost. He was staring into the middle distance out at the city skyline. He had checked out. He was an empty shell. All his bluster, all his lectures about character, it was all just hot air. He was a coward. "Security," Julian said into an intercom on the table. Two uniformed security guards, who had clearly been waiting just outside, entered the room. They were large, calm men. "Richard and Eleanor Hastings need to be escorted from the building," Julian instructed them. My mother was still screaming. "You'll regret this, Ava. You'll be all alone. You'll have no one. You will regret this." The guards took her by the arms. She struggled, but she was weak. As they pulled her out of the room, she twisted her head, her eyes full of a poison I had never seen before. "You'll regret this," she whispered, her voice a venomous hiss. I met her gaze. My heart was pounding in my chest, but my voice was steady. "For once in my life," I said, "I won't." They dragged her out. The guards had to help my father to his feet. He moved like a puppet with its strings cut. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at his own father. He just let them lead him away. The heavy boardroom door clicked shut. And then there was silence. It was the loudest silence I had ever heard. The only sound was the faint hum of the city, 50 floors below. All the strength I had, all the cold, hard clarity suddenly evaporated. My legs felt like water. I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself and sat down, hard. I was shaking. My entire body was trembling with adrenaline and shock. I felt empty. I had won. The charges were filed. Justice was in motion. I hadn't cried. I hadn't screamed. I had been strong, but I didn't feel strong. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel happy. I just felt hollowed out. I put my head in my hands. I still didn't cry. I just focused on breathing. I had just set fire to my entire life. I had just sent my own parents to be arrested. There was no going back from this. I was an orphan of my own making. My grandfather was quiet for a long time. Then I felt him come and stand behind me. He put a large, warm hand on my shoulder. "Let's go, Ava," he said, his voice quiet. We didn't say another word in the boardroom. We walked to the elevator. Isabel and Julian stayed behind, no doubt to manage the fallout. We rode the beautiful glass elevator down in complete silence. We walked through the stunning, cold marble lobby. People in expensive suits rushed past us, talking on their phones, looking important. They had no idea that my world had just ended and begun in the same hour. We stepped out onto the street. The city noise was a sudden assault, cars honking, people talking. It was just a normal Tuesday. My grandfather didn't put me in a car. He just started to walk, and I fell into step beside him. We walked for a full block before he spoke, his eyes on the people passing by. "Justice rarely feels good, Ava," he said, his voice low. "It's not like it is in the movies. It's not a celebration." He paused, taking a deep breath of the city air. "It's just necessary. It's balancing the books. What you're feeling right now, that's not victory. That's just the cost of doing the right thing. And it's a high cost." I looked at him. He understood. He knew I didn't feel good. He knew I felt terrible. And he was telling me that it was okay. "What you did up there," he said, finally stopping and turning to face me, "that was the hardest thing you will ever have to do. I'm proud of you. I'm just so terribly sorry that you had to be the one to do it." A single tear finally escaped and rolled down my cheek. I wasn't sad. It was a tear of release. I was free. It was a strange, grim, and lonely kind of freedom. The weight I had been carrying my entire life, the weight of trying to please them, of trying to earn their love, of feeling like I was the failure, it was gone. They had been a millstone around my neck, and I had finally cut the rope. I was exhausted. I was alone. But I was free. I took a deep breath. The air was cold and smelled of exhaust fumes. It was the best breath I had ever taken in my life. "What now, Grandpa?" I asked. He smiled, a small, sad smile. "Now," he said, "you begin." Weeks passed. The world kept turning. The legal case became a machine, a thing that Julian Croft handled. It was a different part of my life, a grim but necessary background noise. I had money now, not all of it, not yet. But Julian had set up a new bank account for me. The $200,000 from the original trust was in it. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. The first thing I did was pay off my $80,000 student loan in a single, massive payment. The woman on the phone confirmed the balance was now zero, and I just sat there in silence. 10 years of my life, a mountain of debt erased in 10 seconds. I gave Chloe a check to pay off her own loans. She cried, and I held her. I paid our rent for the next year, but I still lived in the same tiny apartment. I didn't know how to be a rich person. I only knew how to not be poor. Then, about a month after the boardroom meeting, I got a call from Julian. "Miss Hastings," he said, "we've secured another asset, an apartment in Pacific Heights. It was purchased 2 years ago with trust funds. Your parents had tenants in it. They were leasing it out." I had to laugh. Of course they were. They weren't just stealing, they were profiting. "The tenants are out," he continued. "The property is yours. The keys are with the doorman. I suggest you go see it." I took a cab. I didn't even know the address. I was nervous. This felt different from the Bellevue house. The Bellevue house was their house, full of their ghosts and their lies. It was being sold, all the cold, dead perfection of it being auctioned off. But this was an apartment. In the city. The cab pulled up in front of a beautiful old brick building. It was classic Seattle, with a green awning and a doorman in a crisp uniform. I walked in. The lobby was warm and inviting, with wood panels and soft lighting. "Can I help you, miss?" the doorman asked. He was an older man with kind eyes. I'm Ava Hastings," I said. I think I'm the new owner of apartment 8A." His face lit up in a polite, professional smile. "Ah, yes, Miss Hastings. We've been expecting you. Mr. Croft's office called. Welcome home. Welcome home." The words hit me hard. I'd never really felt like I had a home. He handed me a new set of keys. I took the elevator to the 8th floor and walked down the quiet, carpeted hallway. I stood in front of the door to 8A, my hand shaking as I put the key in the lock. It turned smoothly. I opened the door, and I just stopped. It was empty. The tenants had moved all their furniture out, but the apartment, it was beautiful. All hardwood floors and high ceilings. I walked in. The living room was huge, and the far wall was made entirely of glass, floor-to-ceiling windows. I walked toward them, drawn by the light. And then I saw the view. It was the entire bay, the Space Needle, piercing the sky, the glint of sunlight on the water of Puget Sound, the distant mountains. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The apartment smelled faintly of sandalwood and vanilla, my mother's signature scent. They had been here. They had staged this place. They had stood here, looking at this very view, while I was across the water counting pennies for groceries. I walked through the empty rooms, a large kitchen with marble countertops, 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a small office. In the office, I opened a desk drawer. They had missed something, a single file folder. I opened it. It was a lease agreement. They had been leasing this apartment for $12,000 a month. $12,000 a month. They were collecting that on top of everything else they had taken. I stood in the middle of the empty living room holding the lease papers. The afternoon sun streamed in, making patterns on the polished floor, and I started to laugh. It was that same bitter, broken laugh from the restaurant. I laughed at the audacity of it. I laughed at the sheer, bottomless greed. I laughed at the absurdity of my life. I laughed at my $400 checking account. I laughed at my mother's voice in my head. "Don't be so dramatic, sweetheart." I laughed and I laughed and I laughed, and then the laughter broke. It shattered and turned into a sob, and I finally cried. I didn't just cry. I grieved. I collapsed onto the floor, right in a patch of sunlight, and I cried for everything. I cried for the girl who ate instant noodles for dinner. I cried for the girl who had to sell her grandmother's locket. I cried for the parents I never truly had. I cried for the family that was nothing but a lie. I grieved for them. I grieved for the whole empty, tragic performance. I cried until I had nothing left, until I was just sitting there on the floor, my face a wreck, feeling empty and raw. I had texted Chloe the address. An hour later, I heard a key in the door. She let herself in. She walked into the living room, holding a bag of takeout, and saw me on the floor. She saw the view. Her eyes went wide. "So," she said softly, "this is a lot." She came and sat on the floor in front of me. She didn't try to hug me. She just sat with me. "You really own this?" she asked. I nodded. The tears were gone. I felt peaceful. "I do," I said, my voice hoarse. Chloe opened the bag of takeout. It was Chinese food, my favorite. "Well," she said, "we can't have you eating your first meal in your new empty palace all alone." We didn't use the kitchen. We sat on the hardwood floor in the middle of the vast empty living room. We ate kung pao chicken and rice out of the little white boxes. We watched the sun go down and the lights of the city begin to glow. "How does it feel?" Chloe asked. I looked out the window. "Quiet," I said, "and heavy." Justice wasn't a party. It wasn't a celebration. It was just quiet. And it was heavy. But it was mine. Months passed. The fog of the legal battle finally cleared. My parents pled guilty. My grandfather, it turned out, was merciful in his own way. He had Julian make a deal. They wouldn't go to jail, but they lost everything. The Bellevue house was sold. The Malibu property was seized. The cars, the art, the jewelry, all of it was liquidated. Everything was put back into the trust. My trust. I got updates from Julian. My parents were living in a small rental apartment somewhere in the valley. Their names had vanished from all the social registers. Their friends had stopped calling. They had become irrelevant. They had built their entire world on an image, and when the image cracked, there was nothing left underneath. I didn't celebrate their downfall. I didn't think about them at all, if I could help it. I was too busy. I started my own design firm, Hastings Design. It was a simple, honest name. My grandfather made a few introductions. He put me in front of people who needed good work. His connections opened the doors, but my talent was what kept me in the room. I was good at my job. I had always been good. The difference was, now I wasn't working from a place of fear. I wasn't desperate. I was selective. I took on projects I was passionate about. I worked out of my beautiful sun-drenched apartment with the view of the bay. I was a freelancer again, but this time it was by choice, not for survival. My grandfather visited often. He would come by on Sunday mornings, and I would make him coffee. In my home, he wasn't the commanding tycoon from the boardroom. He was just Arthur, my grandpa. He sat on my new, comfortable couch one morning, looking out the window. He seemed peaceful. "You know," he said, holding his coffee mug, "you did what I never could." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I always knew your father was weak," he said, his voice laced with an old sadness. "I knew what your mother was. I saw it for years, and I ignored it. I kept giving him second chances. I kept bailing him out of his mistakes, hoping he would change. I loved him, but I never held him truly accountable." He turned to me, his eyes clear and direct. "You did. You drew the line. I was too much of a coward to do it myself." I smiled. "I didn't know I had a line," I said. "You showed me where to draw it. You handed me the pen." He reached over and squeezed my hand. We just sat there in a comfortable silence, watching the ferries glide across the water. I still lived simply. I had millions of dollars, but I still lived like someone who remembered having to be careful. I bought a new car, a safe, sensible Subaru. I furnished my apartment, but not with flashy designer things. I bought comfortable furniture. I bought books. I filled the space with plants. I made it a home. One night, I was driving home from a late client meeting. It was raining. I was on a familiar street and passed by the Gilded Orchid. The chandeliers were glowing, warm and yellow, through the rain-streaked glass. I could see strangers inside, laughing over wine, wearing expensive clothes. They were performing, just like my parents had. They were completely unaware that a family had shattered right there in that very room. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel sadness. I felt nothing. I just kept driving. I didn't stop. I went home. I made myself a cup of tea and walked to my big window. The rain had stopped, and the city was clear and bright. The Space Needle was lit up, a jewel in the dark. my home. I thought about my parents. I wondered, in a detached way, if they were okay. I knew I would never call them, and I knew they would never call me. The break was clean, and it was final. Blood isn't loyalty. My family wasn't my parents. It was my grandfather who had given me justice. It was Chloe who had given me a couch to cry on and a box of takeout when I needed it most. They had tried to teach me that love was a performance, that image was everything. But I had learned something else. I looked out at the lights glittering on the bay. I took a sip of my tea. They stole my future and called it love, I whispered to the empty room. And I smiled, just a little. I took it back.